Namaste. Kia ora, bonjour, willkommen, shalom, howdy y'all, from all the lands from which I hail and my ancestors. I'm Chris Hansen, and somehow you seem to have got two Kiwis and an Austrian, two of whom are now living for our sins in the United States. So thankfully, Mary and Peter provided you with a little bit of some of the lessons learned, and I'm intentional peer support. My intent is really to give you a little glimmer of how we do peer support. My own journey, as you heard in my bio, actually led me to believing that the most therapeutic option when I was locked up and being forced was nicotine, cigarettes. And the smoking room, which they had in those days, was the most pleasant place to be. And that's where all the best conversations were. So I took up smoking, and that's really what gave me the incentive to move on. It was those conversations that made me realize that the wounded must find the healer within, and the healer must find the wounded within. And I realized that what I was recovering from, if anything, was not what was going on in my head, not the crisis that I had, but what I needed to recover from, and it took me many years, were the losses. It was the loss of the custody of a child, the loss of a house, the loss of all my social network, my friends, the loss of a job, the loss of my sense of dignity and self-respect, and having to go to the food shelf and get charity help to stay housed was really what I was needing to move on from. So I got angry, and I reincarnated myself as a bit of an activist from hell. And that felt really good for a while, and I ended up through a series of events doing some work on the UN CRPD, the Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And one of the things we were advocating hard for was the abolition of force and coercion. And I realized that if we were to move towards that, then we needed to be looking for alternatives that work. And so I started to research, and that's where I came across intentional peer support. And it really stuck out to me, head and shoulders above anything else that acknowledged peers. And so this is what I've been doing for the last 10 years. What Sherry Mead set up, started intentional peer support because of her own traumatic experience of going in and out of the hospitals. And at the time, she realized that there was absolutely nothing attractive in the community for her. So she was challenged to set up something different, and ended up setting up one of the world's, actually it was the world's first peer-run respite. It was a fully peer-run alternative to psychiatric hospital. So, intentional peer support. Now, this is intentional rather than international, and I know they look the same, but it was actually started really as an intent to develop relationships that challenged one another to learn and grow and to move forward in our lives. It was developed with an intent, with the understanding that many of us, when we're hospitalised, many of us, when we end up in the mental health services, end up on the receiving end of lots and lots of help. And we lose our sense of citizenship, we lose our sense of dignity and respect and being valued citizens. And we're in that situation where everybody's focused on what's wrong with you. You know that feeling when somebody says to you, "How are you?" And you say, "Oh, I'm fine," and they say, "But how are you really?" And they're kind of fishing, aren't they? They're fishing for what's wrong. I want to focus on the problems that you have, and it makes me feel better. But actually, it makes you feel kind of small, and it keeps a lot of us really stuck. So Bhargavi asked us to address what is a peer. How do we define peer? And this is a really fluid concept. And I've got a whole comedy routine about it that maybe I'll do in the afternoon workshop. It's been variously defined as people who've had their own lived experience of using or surviving psychiatry, people who've experienced emotional distress, people who've been hospitalised. It can get really, really picky about what kind of diagnoses you're allowed to have. And I guess we are starting to define it more broadly as people who have an understanding of marginalisation, oppression, and human rights abuses. And to me, that's really key. And if I'm looking for somebody who's going to work really well as a peer, one of the things that I'm really looking for is that understanding of the losses and the marginalisation that can happen as a result of using services, but sometimes it's a whole lot of other traumatic experiences, like being realising that you were born in a body that's a different gender from the one that you feel that you really are, transgender, LGBTQ, racism, sometimes sexism and violence and rape and many types of trauma. So we're broadening our definition of what is a peer. IPS is a way of, intentional peer support, we call it IPS for short, is a way of thinking about how we can be in relationships and how we can really connect in ways that enable us to provide support and connection in difficult times and extreme states, as well as when things are easier. Charlie was a guy who would go and lie in the middle of the main highway because he believed it was going to bring peace in the Middle East. And the first time that happened, the police came and picked him up, and he got locked up. And he was in the hospital for about 5 or 6 months, and he lost his house and all his possessions, and had to start again. The second time it happened, something similar happened. He got straight into the mental health services because he'd already got a diagnosis, but he also was locked up for a long time and lost many things. The third time, one of his friends saw him, and instead of just calling the police, he went into the middle of the highway and held up his hands, and he stopped the traffic. And he said to him, "Charlie, I need to know what's going on, but I can't have this conversation while you're lying here in the middle of the road. Come and have a cup of tea." And so they got to the side of the road, they went and had a cup of tea, and the outcome was really different. The outcome was not coercive. The outcome was still rocky. It was still like a roller coaster. But the outcome was a conversation and a relationship that was built, and he kept his house, he kept his possessions, he kept the little part-time job that he had, and he built some relationships with people in his community. And I think that is some of the power of peer support. So instead of seeing crisis as something to be feared, we encourage one another to sit with the discomfort to sit together of the comfort, trusting that there is something to be learned and to grow from. So you might be wondering why we provide training for something that seems so organic and natural. I think one of the blights of the West is that we have become a really individualized society, and many of us have forgotten how to have mutual relationships. Many of us have lost our sense of community. Some of us were never very good at relationships in the first place. Some of us lose a lot of that when we have a really difficult time. And some of us get it trained out of us when we are trained in helping professionals. And we're trained to ask for what's going on. We get trained to ask a lot of questions, to provide diagnoses, but we don't get trained to build relationships that really connect and really make a difference. Also, as Peter and Mary have eloquently described, as peers, we're always in danger of doing what has been done to us. So if we come into peer support and we don't have an understanding of what we can do differently, sometimes we end up either replicating the kind of abusive relationships or unhealthy relationships that we're used to, or we do just what our clinicians did to us. And so our intent is to think about how can we connect with one another in ways that really make a difference. IPS is not strictly about anti-psychiatry, but it not only challenges the traditional ways of thinking of illness and many of the ways that were talked about yesterday, it also provides a framework through which to think about relationships that are reflective. So I reflect on the way I am with you, I reflect on some of my habits, and we learn and grow together. It's like a practice of mutual mindfulness. Without a doubt, many people in many cultures do a lot of this intuitively, and actually I believe the best clinicians do this intuitively. And when I think about the principles and tasks of intentional peer support, and I think of really helpful people in my life, I think, they've managed to do some of this without being trained. But this is a way to think about relationships when things are difficult, when we're scared, when we've been trained to do something else, or when we don't know what to do. It's a bit like a martial art. You can learn about it, but it really provides a practice which, a bit like when you're learning dance or Aikido, you can learn about it, you've got to practice it. And so we think about it, and we practice, and we reflect on it. A quote that came out of an Australian Aboriginal women's gathering is, "If you've come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, let us walk together." And I think that encapsulates the spirit of intentional peer support. We intend to stand beside one another. We intend to come with the intention to learn and grow together, because many of us have been helped out. And actually the power imbalance that happens when we are being helped often keeps us very stuck and very marginalised. So we have 3 principles and 4 tasks. And the first principle is shifting our focus from helping to learning together. So I'm very mindfully intending to walk beside you, to learn and grow from you, because you've probably, without a doubt, actually got as much to teach me as I have to teach you. And then we're in a dynamic relationship where we're both valued, and I think Peter had a great quote that reflected that in his presentation. The second one is shifting the focus from the individual to the relationship. And the focus is, the focus is really on us rather than on you. There's lots of people out there who are paid to focus on you and what's wrong with you. And as peers, we have the opportunity to be able to build a relationship that's kind of dynamic and doesn't need to focus on your problems and what's wrong. And the third principle is shifting the focus from fear to hope. And sometimes it's through fear, because sometimes it's just damn scary, actually. So we then talk about how to do this. And we talk about crisis as being danger plus opportunity. We've just had a big earthquake in New Zealand, and I know people in Nepal and Japan also know about earthquakes, thank you. And sometimes having your house fall down is an opportunity to build it back up again. So we encourage people to connect and to think about how we connect. We also challenge people to notice when we disconnect and to acknowledge that reconnection is always an option. It's not always the best option, but it's always an option. How do we do that? How might we do that in this relationship? We acknowledge that each of us has a worldview, and we come with curiosity about how did you come to know what you know? And how does that fit in with how I came to know what I know? Sometimes it's our greatest connector, sometimes it's our greatest disconnector. Mutuality is about both of us being in the conversation together. I can share my life, I can ask for what I need, and that's kind of the magic where the alchemy happens, where we start to build a relationship. There's an energy that happens, and we start to move towards rather than moving away from. It's focusing on where we want to go rather than all that focus on what's wrong that so many of us are so used to. So we're working in 9 countries. We've got peer respites and soteria houses, a bunch of peer centres, alcohol and other substance services, mainstream mental health services and projects, for example, Parachute that Peter was talking about. There's another project in Victoria, Australia, and we often get random requests from even groups of clinicians because they say, this applies to everybody and this will make us practice better. So those are some challenges that we have, trying to work out how to prioritise. Family groups, disability groups, and we've had interest from youth groups, justice and corrections, even the Department of Homeland Security in the United States, which was kind of random. Visit our website, intentionalpeersupport.org. There's a range of videos, and there's an intentional peer support website in Japanese. So some of our resources, thankfully, are in Japanese, translated by a woman called Yuri Kuno, who died earlier this year, and we're grateful for the work that she's done. And Mari Yamamoto is now looking forward to trying to do some work in Japan. And there's a bunch of articles and our contact details. Like Mary, I've sent through a couple of articles, and also you'll get the PowerPoint. So this is the brief whistle-stop tour. We'll be doing a little bit of reflective work and demonstrations and practice in the workshop this afternoon. Thank you very much.